validation plan. Now we have this particular document which defines with the validations pertaining to the data requirements. Now the data requirements which are present as a form of edit checks are our definitions in this particular document. These are specifications on how data is expected to be in the EDC. The same way as we wrote our CRF completion instructions, we will also write definitions for the edit checks, which will run on the entered data. So the data which is already entered in the CRFs, we will have a run of edit checks on these specific data as well. So if there is anything which is missed out during the process, we would cover that in the edit checks as well. So now specifications on how data is expected to be EDC is our purpose of writing the edit check specification document. This is a final document prior to database go live, as we are considering these steps as a part of our setup process. We will consider this as a document prior to the go live. Responsibility lies with the data management to prepare the data validation plan, perform the testing, perform and prepare the testing log, recheck if there are any changes that need to be made, and then sign off the TVP to have the database go live. Now here, this statement carries a lot of importance and multiple steps which needs to be carried out. So let's take this one by one. So here we are considering the data management responsibility to prepare the data validation plan document. Now, when we are talking about having the data management team to prepare the data validation plan, for this we would need a support of the CRF document, which means that before preparing the data validation plan, we should always have a copy of final CRF ready with us. Okay. So a document which is already reviewed, which is already QC'd, which is already been shared and approved by the sponsor, that copy of the CRF we will be using to develop or prepare our data validation plan or the edit check specification document. So depending on each of the data fields which we are capturing in the CRF, we will prepare the data validation specifications or the edit check for them. For say we have demographic form in which the date of birth is being captured. So demographic form, date of birth, this would be directly related to the informed consent date. That the date of birth should always be prior to the informed consent date. It cannot be after the informed consent, which is the date for deriving the age of that patient. So if we are considering in the protocol that there is an age group of patients which is 18 years of age to 55 years of age. So that particular field, which is date of birth, will always be prior to the informed consent, and depending on that entry of date of birth, we will derive the difference, and that will be recorded as the age of that patient. And for that, we will write checks in the data validation plan document that the date should always be prior to the informed consent. Next, on the age. So if the age of the subject is not as per expected requirement, for say 18 to 55 years of age, a query should trigger and that should say that the age is not between the expected range. Similarly, when we have details like height, weight, BMI, which is recorded, again those will be linked to each other to verify the checks which needs to be performed as per the required values in the protocol. Now this was for demography form. Let's come to vital signs. So in vital signs, there will be values of body temperature, root, then blood pressure values. So these values again would have ranges defined, and the ranges would be managed as per the data validation plan requirements. Or say we would have a range of the systolic and diastolic blood pressure to be within the range which is as per specified in the protocol, and that should not differ from those values. So certainly with those dates, with those ranges mentioned, a query should trigger if the blood pressure range are not falling within the ranges. So this is how individually we prepare the DVP based on the particular forms. Now coming to the forms like medical history, concomitant medications, and adverse events, we would rather check the date of the medication with the informed consent date. But say a date of medical history, which is the start date, which should always fall before the informed consent date. Also, there will be a check for the stop date, that the stop date should always be prior to the informed consent date. And if the medication is reported on the concomitant medication form, that should be after the informed consent date. Is this clear, guys, when we talk about the start date and stop date comparison of medical history and concomitant medications? With respect to the informed consent date, are we guys clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So accordingly, we define for adverse events and concomitant medications also. Like there is a medication which is mentioned on the concomitant medication form, which has a reference of adverse event mentioned on an AE form. Or likewise, if we have an adverse event which is reported, which has concomitant medication taken reported as yes. So we should be able to find a correlation of concomitant medication reported on the CONMED form likewise. So here, when we are talking about adverse event and concomitant medication checks mentioned on the data validation plan, what we would define is check the date of adverse event term with the concomitant medication indication reported and the corresponding dates. Depending on that, a query would trigger and we would need to then cross check whether the dates are reported correctly or not. So this is the purpose of defining edit checks or the data validation plan according to the CRFs. Then the next step is performing the testing. So this would be the step which is called as edit check testing, and for that we would prepare the test cases which is test data entry which is entered in the test environment. So we would enter both the dummy data which is correct and dummy data which is false. So true and false data entry would happen, and depending on that, we'll have our testing done. What else would we require during testing is the testing log. So the edit check specification document or the data validation plan document itself would have its use in preparing the testing log, as in we'll add additional columns in the data validation plan document and then use it as patient number and test case number added into it. So what is the patient number where we are testing this, and whether it is pass or fail depending on the test data which is added into the system. We'll see about it in detail in our upcoming slides, but for you guys to understand, we would be carrying out such activity when we are defining the edit check specification document and its testing. Now, after all this process is completed, we would recheck if there are any changes to be made, and then we'll sign off the data validation plan, and we are good to go live from the setup process to the conduct. This testing log, which is prepared and documented while performing the UAT, is going to serve as an important part when we are going to manage the study in the conduct phase, because that will be our reference where we have completed the testing and the database is functioning properly as per the checks defined in the data validation plan document. Any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay. So here is an example, to be considered how we are going to define our edit check specification document. So the first one is about the informed consent. Was written informed consent obtained from the subject? The type of check is electronic. We will write the edit check as the was written informed consent is missing, and please clarify such an instance, which will be fired on this particular question: was informed consent obtained? Again, as we saw, this is a mandatory field. We will be expecting both one, an error prompt during the data entry process, and second, a query which should be generated after the form is submitted. So in both the cases, this query would trigger when we are keeping it as a mandatory field. Going to the next, we will relate the primary question, was written informed consent obtained, to the other questions on the form, which is date of signing written informed consent and informed consent type. So when we are relating two fields on a single CRF, what we would be expected to do is write the edit check specifications in a way that it will help the programmer to relate which fields on the CRF are being considered for comparison. Now here what we have compared is the field which is to be marked yes or no, was informed consent obtained, and the other two fields, which is date and time of getting the informed consent. So we are comparing these two fields, whether the informed consent obtained is marked as yes or no. Now, the other thing which we need to take care of is considering this check as electronic, and the field on which this edit check would fire is the same, which is was informed consent obtained by the subject, yes or no. So now in this, when we do the edit check specification UAT, what we would consider is both the scenarios. We'll mark it as yes, and then put the responses for both date and time, and then keeping the primary question as yes, we'll keep the responses as blank. to see whether it is triggering a query for us or not. Similarly, for the next question, what we would do is mark the primary question as no, was informed consent obtained no, and then the two questions of date and time in the first instance would be kept as blank, and in the next we would keep the data entered and see if the data is making the edit check work or not, whether the query is firing for the wrong fields or not. So if the data entry is wrong, the field should make the edit check fire a discrepancy. So that is how we are going to perform the testing for this particular edit check specification document. Next, again, when we talk about informed consent time, we'll make it electronic as well as manual, because when it is having the 24-hour format, that particular time has to be cross-checked with the system and with the manual intervention as well. So this check will be kept as electronic as well as manual. Similarly, going for the demography, we'll have mandatory fields, which is gender, age, height, weight, and BMI. So this will be mandatory fields along with a question whether the data is missing, and to cross check whether the data has to be entered or not by the site personnel. Is this clear, guys? Do you understand how the edit checks are defined? Or tell me if you need more examples. We can take more examples on this. Are you guys able to hear me?
So can we have more examples?
Yeah, sure. Let's take another example. I'll put up the ECS document on the screen. Let me know once you are able to see that. Is this visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So this is how an edit check specification looks like. This would be an Excel file. The document name is specified like edit check specifications document. There are versioning, like initial version and the date. And likewise, if there is up versioning, we'll mention the next version number. There is protocol number, and again, signatures and dates of the ones who prepared it, reviewed it. Then there is a database designer who is going to be designing the database accordingly. There will be biostatisticians, medical monitors, operations manager, and the data management head. So here we are going to include the cross-functional teams as well in the review and approval of this health check specification document. And again, there will be revision history, which is mentioned how it changed from version 1 to 2 and likewise, and what are the changes. So this is the initial part of the document. Let's move to the part where actually the checks are written. So we'll go one by one on the panels or the CRFs. Let's see demography first. Okay, so we have the edit check number in the first column. Then we have panel name, the field on which the query would fire, the type of check, what is the edit check firing field, and comments if any. So now here, let's consider from the initial, which is the gender. Again, as we saw, these are mandatory field checks. We have seen this example of demography, so let's go on some other form, or say informed consent. So we saw both these, again informed consent also. Let's go for medical history. Yeah. So the medical history form has a primary question: has the subject experienced any past or ongoing medical